Writing can be difficult in a number of ways, but few challenges are bigger than time management. Most of us approach time management by taking stock of our tasks and then scheduling them. In order for this approach to work, we need an accurate sense of how long things take. But writing works differently because writing is not a linear process. Instead, writing is creative and recursive. The word linear comes from the root line, so unsurprisingly, linear processes flow neatly from one sequence of events to another. We start by focusing our efforts and concentration on step 1. We finish that and turn our attention to step 2, and so forth. For instance, suppose you want spaghetti and meatballs for dinner. If you choose to cook this dish by following a recipe from a magazine, you're engaged in a linear process. First, you'll need to chop and mix the ingredients for the meatballs. Second, you need to form and cook the meatballs. Third, you need to boil water and cook the pasta. Cooking is linear because we don't repeat steps once we've finished them. By contrast, a recursive process is one that moves in loops rather than a straight line. Though recursive processes may have a clear sequence of steps that will follow in a predictable order, the main difference is that we often have to repeat some steps. To see a recursive process in action, let's again consider the process of making spaghetti and meatballs. However, instead of following a simple recipe, imagine we're trying to recreate our grandmother's special sauce. In this case, we know what we're trying to create, but we often have to loop back and repeat, refine, or experiment with different steps in the process. We don't just chop the ingredients and form the meatballs. Instead, we wonder if the ingredients that we've chosen are the right ones, meaning that step 1 is not completely finished by the time we move on to step 2. Obviously, this is more time-consuming, and even when we think the recursive process is finished, we have to solicit feedback to see if our impressions are correct. This is why it is so difficult to manage time when writing. Often, there is no real way to predict how long it will take. You may find that the first idea you devise for your anthropology paper is brilliant. Step 1 complete. At the same time, you might be working on an assignment for your political science class and remain stuck on step 1 for weeks, trying and failing to come up with a good idea for your paper. How does this happen? In short, this did not happen because you're a bad writer. It happens because you engaged in a recursive process where the steps didn't fall into place on the first, second, or even third try. For whatever reason, you didn't find the perfect ingredients in the perfect amount at the perfect moment. So, how can you use this understanding of recursive and linear processes to your benefit? First, it may help to envision the different steps of the writing process and visualize how they're connected. Brainstorming or topic development, research, thesis development and outlining, drafting, revision, editing, and proofreading. Armed with this knowledge, you may want to try some of the following techniques to cope with the stress that accompanies an unpredictable process. 1. Budget time wisely. You never know whether any given paper will come together quickly or involve a lot of dead ends. So whenever possible, give yourself weeks rather than days. 2. Go backwards to move forwards. If you are writing and you hit a wall, consider the possibility that you need to go backwards rather than forwards. For example, suppose you are working on a 5-page paper and you simply cannot find strong examples to support your main point. This problem is solvable, but only if you move back to research, finding concrete examples or data points to illustrate your thesis. 3. Seek feedback early and often. Of course, it can be frustrating to repeat a step that you thought was already finished. That is why our third tip is to seek feedback early and seek it often. Sometimes, we get so close to our papers that we cannot see what is missing. A fresh pair of eyes can work wonders. 4. Use self-knowledge to analyze the process. Though recursive processes are unpredictable, we can still plan for them. In particular, it's useful to consider our own skill sets, motivations, interests, and talents. For example, if your final paper requires 10 peer-reviewed articles, and you've struggled to find or understand sources in the past, you may be able to predict that the research phase is going to be slow. 5. Practice self-compassion. Though it's natural to get frustrated when you hit a lot of dead ends, remember that these situations are to be expected when engaging in a recursive process. Failure is a big part of any creative process, and it's important to remember that these failures are not a reflection of you. The tips we've offered here are not about spending less time on your writing, but they are about feeling that your time is well spent and perhaps better understanding where that time goes when you're working on a particularly tough project. And remember, you can always ask for help. The librarians at the USC libraries and consultants at the Writing Center are familiar with the nature of a creative process, and they may be able to provide suggestions or just simple encouragement.